women from the GYA and from the Women in Science group in the GYA to set the scene for us.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on which region of the world you are right now. I'm Lydia Reimann, one of the Women in Science Working Group colleagues, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the day one of the Inclusive Leadership for Women in Science workshop. So this workshop has been designed and will be facilitated by the Inclusive Innovation team. The topic of today's workshop is finding balance. We chose this topic as we are sure that at least once in your life, you have experienced the tension of competing priorities. For example, choosing between professional responsibilities and personal or family commitments, or maybe at one point you were wondering whether you should prioritize self-care or taking care of others. I believe that many of us have faced such dilemmas, and it is important to understand how to properly balance these competing priorities. With the help of facilitators from Inclusive Innovation, we have put together a two-part online workshop. It is designed to equip you with strategies to navigate these dilemmas and find a harmonious balance. Although the workshop is organized by the Women in Science group, it is important to note that the tools and techniques are useful not only for women, but for everyone, regardless of gender. Finally, on behalf of the Women in Science co-lead, Marilee, Morita, and myself, we would like to thank the facilitators from the Inclusive Innovation, the GYA office, particularly Jennifer for her excellent coordination, the Henry Lewis Foundation for the funding. Special thanks to Priscilla, former co-chair of the GYA, for raising these funds, and everyone who has helped directly or indirectly. And most importantly, all of you for being present today. And also, I take this opportunity to inform you all that the call for the new member, GYA new member is open as well. So if you want to become a GYA member, please go ahead and apply. The deadline is on the 18th of September. So on this note, I'd like to wish you all a productive and enriching workshop. Thank you. Over to you, Izzy.
Thank you, Lydia. All right, just quick introductions for you. We are your Inclusive Innovation team. My name is Ismat, but I go by Izzy. We have Alyssa here, who is also a facilitator for today. And we have Emma, who is our producer and co-facilitator behind the scenes. If you have any tech challenges, Emma is the person you need to contact immediately. She is a whiz when it comes to technology as well, and will hopefully have you back up and running in no time at all. Just a quick word about who we are. So today's session, as Lydia mentioned to you, is brought to you by Inclusive Innovation. And we're a team that specializes in facilitating capacity surprising amongst scientists. And we have a huge focus on the Global South, and we often find ourselves working with organizations like the Global Young Academy, the African Science Leadership Program, the ASEAN Science Leadership Program. So we do a lot of leadership labs in this domain. I am here representing not just Inclusive Innovation today, but also representing Beyonder, which is my own little company. And the mission at Beyonder is really to empower this generation and the next with the power of creative thinking. So what Beyonder does is it works with parents, we work with young adults, we work with educators, all of it to help enable them to use creative thinking and creative problem solving in their lives. So with that, let's get to what we hope to accomplish today. So today we're going to be talking about polarities. And if you have ever been cornered in a room with me, you've probably heard me talk about polarities, because I think it is one of the most untapped resources and ways of thinking that we have encountered. It's something you may have heard about if you've been a part of the GYA leadership workshops. You may have seen it before, but the application that we're going to be using it for today is really personal. So as with most of our tools, things that we share can be applied professionally and personally. Today, our application for polarity thinking will be quite personal. We're also going to spend a lot of time today talking about how we map a polarity, and that all these words will make sense to you once you stick with us through this workshop. But we're going to be mapping a polarity. You're going to have a chance and opportunity to work with someone else who is on this call as a peer-to-peer coach. So please be aware that we're going to be asking you to turn your videos on, at least in the breakout rooms, so that you can be engaged with somebody and have a deep and meaningful conversation with them. So as you're also selecting which polarity to work on, keep in mind that we will be asking you to share with somebody else. So while this tool can be applied to absolutely anything, for today, you might want to pick something that you're comfortable talking about. And then finally, we'll be talking about, okay, you've identified your polarities, you've mapped them, what now, right? How do you action change? How do you use this information so that you can make it work for you? So those are our objectives for today. Just a quick tip. This is an interactive workshop. It's a little less interactive than our normal inclusive innovation workshops because unfortunately, there's a lot of broadcasting time where we're going to be doing a lot of talking because we're trying to share a new technique and tool with you. But we're going to be asking you to work along with us. So you will find that we will be sharing worksheets and we will be asking you to work in parallel with us as we show you how to use those worksheets. So it will be interactive in the sense that you will be working on your material, and there will also be opportunities for you to interact with each other in breakout rooms. So with that in mind, what I'd like to say is, please, while you're here, if you could turn off your email notifications, turn off your Slack. This is not one of those sessions where you can check out for 5 minutes and go quickly take care of some work stuff. This is going to require you to be present the entire time. So if you could do that, that would be wonderful, because we don't want you to miss something that's important. And because everything we do will be building on other pieces, you want to stay engaged. Videos on as far as possible. We understand that when you're in plenary, it might be harder to keep your videos on, but I am someone who really responds well to being able to see people's faces so that I can see if what I'm saying is making sense, if it's connecting. So if you wouldn't mind turning your video on, and if your bandwidth and technology and Wi-Fi access allows it, it would be wonderful. But at least in the breakout rooms, please make sure your videos are on and be prepared to share. Just something that's very important to us at Inclusive Innovation is our code of care. And when we talk about our code of care, we're really talking about 3 parts. The first part is taking care of yourselves. So making sure that you don't suffer needlessly if there is a challenge, if you encounter technology issues, or there's something that's making you uncomfortable, make it known to us so that we can help you. If you're struggling in a breakout room, don't struggle. Immediately, ask for help, or as soon as you can, jump back into plenary and ask us for help. We'll always be there to help you. So suffering is optional. Engage with empathy. So this is really, we're asking you to lean into others. And what that means is, it brings us to our second point, which is practice generous listening, right? Listen with your whole selves. When someone else is sharing their story or sharing their map or sharing their concerns, listen. Don't be thinking about how am I going to respond to this, or what am I going to say when it's my turn. Your job is really just to be there, to be a genuine, authentic listener for them. And also be aware that some of the things people might share could sound, I don't know, challenging or remarkable or surprising to you. And that can often come from cultural differences. So please honor the fact that not everything you hear might be things you agree with, but there is a lot of cultural diversity in this room, and we should respect that and be willing to defer judgment around that. And then finally, this idea of staying engaged, which is, keep your videos on when you're in the breakouts. Make sure that you connect with somebody and that you're listening deeply, and also to respect everyone's story. So really, if you could commit to practicing this code of care, hopefully this will become a really safe environment for everybody here. Which brings me to something that's not on here and probably should be, that what you hear in this workshop should stay with you, because we're going to be inviting people to work on things that are personal challenges. I would like to believe that, that won't get shared with other people. So what happens in this workshop and what happens in the breakout rooms stays in the breakout rooms. Don't share personal details of other people's lives with anyone else. So if we can all agree to that, that would be great. Any questions about our code of care before we move on, or anything to add to it? No? Okay. Great. All right, let's move on then. Okay, so we're going to be talking about polarities today. And people always say to me, what the heck are polarities? And we're going to be warming you up to the idea of what are polarities through several different approaches. But let me ask you this question. Have you ever experienced a situation where the same issue keeps coming up over and over again? Right? You find yourself perhaps with your partner, you're having the same argument again and again. I know I do. Or that you suddenly, one day you think this is the right answer, but the next day you completely disagree with your previous right answer, and you suddenly find that you're on the opposite end of the spectrum. I see a lot of head shaking. So if you've heard this and if you've experienced this, what we call wicked problems, then sure, give me a thumbs up or put it in the chat, right? Me too. I'll give you an example. My husband and I are always arguing about how tidy does the house really need to be, right? So in his opinion, if we tidy up once a month, it's enough. And for me, that's absolutely not acceptable. And so these are this is an issue we've been fighting about for 31 years. So I can definitely imagine that there's a polarity at play. Okay, so I see enough yes signs. All right. So what are polarities? Well, polarities are really indestructible. So for one thing, let me not raise your hopes and think that once you leave this workshop, you will have solved the problem and it will go away forever. No, unfortunately, I cannot promise you that, because polarities never, ever get solved. You can only manage a polarity. You can't make it disappear, right? Because they're indestructible. And when we talk about paradoxes, what we mean is that polarities are generally two options that cannot coexist, and yet they're interdependent. They must exist within the system at different times, but they cannot coexist. So they create a lot of tension in your lives. And once you become sensitive to polarities, you are going to see them everywhere. Right? So you pick up a newspaper and you read enough articles in the newspaper, without question, you will start to notice that there are polarities at play. You'll be talking to your friends in a cafe or over dinner, and you'll suddenly realize that what they're actually talking about are polarities that they're encountering in their lives. So once you become sensitized to polarities, you'll see that they're everywhere. And the unfortunate news is that you cannot solve a polarity so that it goes away, but you can learn to manage a polarity and be able to leverage it so that you can benefit from it rather than suffer as a result of it. So what does that actually translate to? What do we mean by something that cannot coexist and yet creates tension, right? So let's consider some visible polarities. And our good friend Emma here will give us some choices about some polarities.
Perfect, thank you. So firstly, what I'd love everyone to do is to jump on to a tool we use called Mentimeter. So I've shared the link in the Zoom chat so you can take part, but I will also share my screen because if you'd like to take part on your phone, you can also jump in and use this QR code as well. So once you're on that, and you can of course jump into the Zoom chat as well and click in there as well. I'll hand back over to Izzy because we are going to talk about two types of people in the world.
Exactly. So there are two types of people in the world, and you know which type you are almost immediately when you're faced with a choice. And the choice can be as basic as, Emma, would you go to, oh, thank you. Are you one of those people who sets multiple alarms to make sure you're ready on time? Or do you have just a single one? All right. Do you see how you could not be both, but you can certainly have a strong opinion about which one you are? I'll tell you this, that I was having anxiety dreams and stress dreams about being late for this session this morning. And so I definitely had multiple alarms. Single but snooze 3 times. There you go. All right. What about the next one? Is your bed made every morning, or do you leave it open for airing? Yes. I would say that the option A is definitely my husband's preferred approach, and option B is mine. So I would not leave the room without fixing the bedspread. Oh, and then this is an age-old dilemma. Is it toilet paper over or toilet paper under? All right, good. I'm glad to see that there's a clear majority for the right way here, because I have been known to go to other people's bathrooms and fix the toilet paper roll in their bathrooms. Because, of course, sorry? And then I think there's one more.
I do this also.
You do this also? Yes, of course.
Yes, yes.
Not. All right. And yet we have people who don't agree with us. All right. Do you have a zero inbox? Or do you have multiple unread notifications on your phones? Right. And how do you feel if you're a zero inbox person who suddenly comes back from vacation and finds, 600 emails in their inbox? So we have a lot of procrastination in the group, or a lot of overwhelmed people in the group. Okay. And is there one more, Emma? Oh, really? There's only one way to eat a chocolate bar. Scream silently. Yes, scream. Exactly. Okay. And then, do you generally use a carrot or a stick to get people to do what you need? You a carrot person? Right. Okay. It depends. Great answer, Fatima. So you're going to find that it depends is really the answer to most polarities. But let's go to the last slide. Okay, so we asked you the question, how often do you find yourselves torn between competing priorities in your personal and professional lives? And we're going to see that there was a clear majority of you who do find yourselves torn between competing priorities in your personal and professional lives. And that's not surprising because our lives are complex. And let's take a look at some visible polarities. Emma, would you be willing to Give me back the screen. Thank you. Okay. So we're going to experience a physical polarity, okay? And I'm going to be inviting you to breathe with me. Now, how many of us have tried mindful breathing? I'm sure I've done it. Definitely don't do it often enough, but definitely something that we've tried our hands at. All right. What I'm going to ask you to do is to breathe in response to my instructions. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to first, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to ask you to do before I ask you to do it. So hold on, don't start breathing to my commands yet. But in a moment, I'm going to ask you to empty out your lungs and then to breathe in, right? And I'd like you to keep breathing in and breathing in and breathing in till I tell you to stop. At which point, then you start breathing out. And when I ask you to start exhaling, you keep exhaling and exhaling and exhaling till I tell you to stop, right? Does everyone understand the instructions? Okay, are you ready? Sit back from your desks, shake it off, get comfortable. All right, empty your lungs, let all the air out. And now start breathing in, okay? Think about all that wonderful oxygen that you're pulling into your lungs. Keep breathing in. Keep breathing in. Keep breathing in. Keep breathing in. Do you feel like you're about to burst because you can't breathe in just a little? Okay. All right. You can breathe out. Start exhaling. Start exhaling. That probably feels pretty good. All that carbon dioxide leaving your body. Keep exhaling. Keep exhaling. Exhaling. Keep exhaling. Keep exhaling. All right. Okay. Breathe normally. I don't want anybody to pass out on my watch. But how was that experience? Right? Would anyone like to unmute and share what they experienced when I first asked you to breathe in? Anyone? Okay. When I first asked you to breathe in, you probably felt pretty good, right? It started out feeling like you're getting all this great oxygen. You were waking up. You could finally feel your lungs expanding. You hadn't realized how collapsed they felt sitting in that chair for this amount of time. Until it got to a point where it actually didn't feel good anymore. You felt like you were going to burst. You were a balloon that had been stretched to capacity. And if I asked you to breathe in one more time, you would have burst. And then immediately, the thing that pulls you is this desire to exhale, right? So and then when you started exhaling, you immediately felt better. All that carbon dioxide was being released. The tension in your lungs was being reduced. The pressure in your lungs was going down, and you started to feel more comfortable. You felt, okay, lighter, and now I'm not holding my breath anymore. And then it got to a point where I pushed you to a point where you felt like you were being deprived of oxygen. Okay? And the thing that you most wanted in the world was to inhale again. So all polarities work the same way. They start out feeling pretty good. It feels pretty good to be in a certain state. And then after a while, that feeling good starts to diminish and diminish until you start to feel really pretty awful and you start to bottom out. And the thing that looks the most appealing in the world is the opposite state. It's the state that you have been avoiding till that point. And then you start to feel really good about that opposite state. And then after a while, that starts to feel really bad because you've spent too long in that state. And now the thing that pulls you back is the original state. So all polarities have this infinite loop where you start out feeling really good about one, then feeling really awful, and then moving over to the other, feeling really good about it, feeling awful about it, and then back again. The thing is, if I asked you to inhale and exhale at the same time, you couldn't possibly do it, right? That's not possible because inhalation and exhalation cannot coexist. And yet you cannot keep inhaling without also giving exhalation a turn, right? So that's the thing that speaks to interdependence. So you cannot have one without the other. And the thing that I want you to notice is that when you deny one or the other, that creates tension. Okay? And all polarities, every single polarity that we will encounter today and talk about today will create exactly that kind of tension. They will be choices that cannot coexist, and they will be interdependent. You can't have one without the other, and denying yourself one or the other will create tension and stress and possibly even, you know, cause great harm to you if you ignore the other polarity. All right, so let's look at some polarities that are going to be really useful to you in just a moment. Before we do that, I want to ask you the question, how well equipped do you currently feel to navigate competing polarities in your life? So we asked you, do you encounter them? Your answer was overwhelmingly yes. But the question is, okay, when you encounter them, how well equipped do you feel to manage those polarities? And I think Emma has a little poll for us to take before we move on. Emma?
Doing something funny behind the scenes. I'm not sure why. Here we go.
There we go. Okay.
Hold on 2 seconds. It's for some reason. There you go. Try this one. There you go. Sorry. Team.
Okay. All right. How equipped do you feel to manage the competing priorities in your professional life? And your personal life, actually. Okay.
That's nearly everyone. I'm going to end the poll so you can see the results.
Okay, thank you. All right. So we have some people who say it's a struggle, and then we have people who think, perhaps yes, perhaps I could, and perhaps I couldn't. Well, that's good, because it means that you're off to a good start. It probably means that you're already aware of the tensions and polarities in your life, which is great news. So let's take a look at some of these polarities. And in order to do that, I'm going to ask Emma to share with you a handout. And on this handout, I'm going to ask you to go into the editable PDF. So there's the handout. If you click on that and download it, you should be able to see some check boxes next to each of the pairs. And what I'd like you to do is to take the next minute or so, and don't overthink it. Really push yourself to move through this as quickly as possible. But within each pair, I'd like you to choose which one you find yourself gravitating towards, right? So which one do you tend to prefer? Do you tend to prefer to be active or at rest? Do you tend to prioritize care for self or care for others? So on each row, you're going to make a choice.
And just so everyone's aware, this is what you should be seeing in your worksheet. This is what Izzy's talking about. So the worksheet that you can see to download as a PDF in your Zoom chat, please open that on your own computer and then start working on this section here.
Emma, do you see the checkboxes in your download? Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, so work your way through the list. And it is strength and vulnerability. I don't know why the and is missing in my, oops, sorry. In my slide. Okay. And I already see that some of you are encountering challenges. Some of these are harder. And some of these are easy choices.
Thank you, Marelli.
Izzy, do you have a suggestion if anyone has opened as a preview on Mac, which is what I've just done, and you can't see the checkboxes, you can just make a mark next to them, right?
Yes, you can either make a mark or just jot down for yourself which one you chose. All right. Let's check in. What happened there? Were there some polarities that were really difficult to choose? Were there some choices that were very difficult to make? Definitely. Okay. All right. Which one, if you wouldn't mind sharing, which was the hardest choice to make? If you wouldn't mind sharing in the chat, I'd just like to get a sense of which was the hardest choice to make. Strength and vulnerability, work life. Haven't finished yet. Okay. Knowing and wondering. Okay. So I imagine that when you say it was hard, that it was something where you kept thinking to yourself, I'm not sure which one I prioritize, or it depends, right? The answer might have been, it depends. Okay, good. Okay. All right. Care for self and care for others is the hardest. Yes. Okay. Now I'm going to ask you a different question. And that question is, which was the easiest one to pick? Which one did you look at and say, oh yeah, right away, this is the one? Which was the easiest to pick? Activity and rest, safety and risk, strength and vulnerability. Okay. These were the easiest to pick. You knew right away which one you were going to pick out of those. All right. That's great. Well, let me tell you that it is the easy ones that are the ones you need to pay attention to. Okay. Because here's what happens when we can pick, all right, Helen, well done, no easy ones. So that means you're sensitive to polarities in your life. That's great news. What happens is that when we find ourselves being really quick to pick which one you tend to prioritize, that probably means that that's a polarity that you have become polarized around, right? That's the polarity you most need to pay attention to. I'll give you an example. For me, the polarity that I have to really pay attention to is care for self and care for others. Growing up in the culture that I grew up in, just a natural proclivity to assuming responsibility that perhaps isn't mine alone, right? I tend to prioritize care for others. And so when I took a look at this list, I knew immediately that that was the polarity that I would pick, care for others. And that means that I tend to ignore care for self to my detriment, right? Or to the detriment of others. So I really have to pay attention to that polarity. So what I'm going to be inviting you to do for the next 20 minutes or so that we're going to be working on creating our maps is I'd like you to work on a polarity that was easy for you to pick, right? Because that's the polarity you need to pay attention to. Does that make sense? Any questions before we move on? Okay, if there are any questions, please let us know, because now what we're going to invite you to do is to move along with us in mapping a polarity, right? And what
I wonder, I have a question, please.
Please, go ahead.
I wonder how it will be easy for me, and at the same time, I have to take care of it. I couldn't get it.
It's easy for you to choose. Making the choice was easy. You said immediately that in my example, I would immediately say, yes, care for others is what I prioritize, is what I focus on.
You focus on to solve or to deal with it?
No, I focus on it. That's the choice I make. Whenever I have a choice between spending my time caring for others or caring for myself, I always prioritize caring for others.
Oh, yes, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So any other questions before we move on? No. Okay. In your handouts, you should have a map that looks like this, a worksheet that looks like this. And hopefully all were easy then, Neha. Okay, then you pick one that you want to work on right now and that you want to, you'd be willing to talk about with somebody else, right? Okay, so hopefully you all have access to a map that looks like this in your handouts. And what we're going to do is you are going to be mapping a polarity that's yours. So what that means is I want you to choose one of the polarities from the list that you had around, that was easy for you to pick. That was a quick explanation. The map is in your handout. Do you see it in the second page of your handout or the third page of your handout? Before? Is it before? Yes, okay. All right, perfect. So what we're going to do is we are going to build a map together. And in order to do that, we are going to use an example that you can follow along with the example that I'm going to be sharing. And
is it just a quick one? Oh yeah, perfect. I was about to say, this is the map that you should see on the second page or third page of your worksheet that I shared in the chat, just so it's really clear. But it is editable in your sheet, so you'll be able to follow along with Izzy.
Yes. And so what I'm going to ask you to do is make sure you know which polarity pair you're working with. So somebody said care for self and care for others. Somebody else said strength and vulnerability. So you're going to be building your map for the polarities that you pick, right? The example we're going to be working with is an example that Alyssa and I talked about earlier when we had a conversation in preparation for this particular session. Emma, would you keep an eye on the chat for me because I won't be able to look at it while I'm also navigating this.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So Alyssa, could you remind me, what was the polarity that you found that you were polarized around, that you found very easy to pick?
Actually, it was one that I'm currently experiencing in my life at the moment, having a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old, two daughters at that age. So my the polarity that I'm struggling with is gentle love and tough love. And my selection was gentle love because I'm the mama. So I have to be the one that has the, show them gentle love. So when I talk about gentle love, for me, it means more a gentle way of reprimanding them, using verbal cues and reprimanding them like gently. Whereas tough love for me means using physical or stricter reprimands.
Okay, that's great to hear. So your polarities were gentle love and tough love. Now I put gentle love on the left-hand side of the polarity map because that was the one that you tend to prefer, right? Yeah. That was your preferred polarity. So for those of you who are working on a different pair, for example, if you're doing care for self and care for others, if you tend to prioritize care for others, I'd like you to put care for others on the left-hand side of your map and care for self on the right-hand side of your map, right? Any questions? Okay. All right. So you're building your own map and we're using Alyssa's as an example of how you build a map, and please follow along and build your own as we go through. All right, Alyssa, the question I asked you after that was, why does it matter? Why is it important for you to balance the polarities of gentle love and tough love? What becomes possible if you do that?
I don't, for me, all I see is the positives of gentle love. And I'm against, I have more bias towards gentle love than tough love.
Okay.
But I think that if I had to say, if I had to balance it, it would mean raising kids who understand, respect, they are accountable, they have a sense of responsibility, and they feel secure.
Okay, great. So if you were able to do it well, then you would accomplish this higher goal, right?
Yes.
This more important outcome, which is raising children who understand, respect, have accountability and responsibility, and who feel secure in the belief that they are loved.
Yes.
Right? So now, for those of you who are following along, when you look at the two polarities that you are struggling with, right? If you could resolve the tension, what would become possible as a result of it? What is the big overarching goal? What is the greater purpose of solving those polarities? And again, I can share another example. For me, care for self and care for others, I would be living a balanced life where I would not resent the other people that I love and care for in my life, and that I wouldn't be experiencing burnout, right? I would be healthy and fulfilled. So that would be my greater purpose. So take a moment to think about, what is your greater purpose? What is the reason why you need to balance this polarity? Okay. And when you've done that, any questions about that? Okay. The other thing that drives us and motivates us is not just what we hope for, but it's also what we fear.
Yeah.
Right. So, Alyssa, what would happen if you did not pay attention to this polarity? If you didn't resolve this?
I think it would lead to dysfunctional family dynamics, because I, as the mom, feel like gentle love is going to work and should be the way, and whilst the dad feels like tough love is the way, and so that will cause frustration and tension between us.
Okay. So let's say that it would lead to frustration and dysfunctional family dynamics, and you want to avoid that, right?
Yes.
So for those of you who are following along, think about what would happen if you didn't solve this tension. If you didn't manage this tension well, it might be something you're experiencing already. So in my case, I'm experiencing physical and emotional burnout. I've been caring for a lot of people in the last couple of years. Oh, I like this example. Okay, safety and risk, reaching greater success by living in a stable environment, but also being able to risk to achieve more in my professional life. Yes, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. So think about, what do you stand to lose if you don't accomplish this? Okay. Any questions before we move on? No. All right. So now I'm going to bring you into this quadrant, Alyssa. And this quadrant here in the top left-hand corner, there is a reason why you tend to prefer gentle love, right? There is a definite reason why you think it works, why you think it's a good option, why I think care for others is a good idea in my map. So what I'd like you to tell me is, what is the upside of focusing on gentle love? What is it that you think is the positive outcome of focusing on gentle love? I'd like you to give me between 3 to 5 plus points of gentle love.
A big one for me is that there's no physical punishment with gentle love, because I don't believe that physical punishment should be something you do to kids. And then the second one is I'm not giving them, I want to be loved and liked by my kids. So I'm not giving them a reason to hate me or resent me when I'm tough or giving them tough love. The third one is I'm not giving them a reason to complain, because in my personal life at the moment, I'm separated from their biological dad. So I'm not giving them a reason to complain to him. And then the fourth one is I want to be seen as the provider of love to my kids. I don't want them to see me as the one that's going to hurt them.
Yeah.
I want them to see me as the person that provides security. So that's the fourth one. And then I think the last one would be, for me, I believe that the impact of words lasts longer than the impact of physical discipline. I think that if you get a beating or you get a hiding, the pain will go away and then you'll forget about it. But if I tell my kid, for example, that I'm disappointed in them, it's something that would last longer. So yeah, that's a five that I can think of.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. Now, those of you who are following along, which I hope is everyone, what I'd like you to do is think about what is the upside of the pole that you are working on, the polarity that you're working on. So if in my case, where I would have picked care for others over here, I would list what is the upside of prioritizing care for others. Everyone loves me, I am useful, I'm taking care of my elders, I find myself being seen as responsible and caring, right? I'm able to help my community. So I would put all of those as my upsides. What are your upsides of the polarity that you have in the left quadrant? Take a couple of minutes to make sure you list between 3 and 5 upsides. Anyone struggling with this? Right? Okay. Now, the next quadrant that we're going to work on is the opposite, right? There's a reason why you've prioritized gentle love, Alyssa. And the reason also, it includes not just, it doesn't just include the positive aspects of gentle love. It also, there are reasons why you avoid tough love, that you think it's a negative, right?
Yeah.
Now we're filling on the diagonal. We're going down to the quadrant on the bottom right. Okay? And we're talking about what are the negative effects of tough love? What is the negative effect of prioritizing tough love over gentle love to the exclusion of gentle love?
One would be that I personally I feel guilty about being too harsh. So I like beat myself up about it if I have to give tough love. And then the opposite is that it involves physical punishment, which I'm against. And then the positive is that I don't want them to resent me. So the opposite would be that they start to resent me because of.
Yeah. So I see what you're doing there, and it's perfect. It's exactly how we want you to think about this. What Alyssa is doing is she's looking at the upsides of gentle love, and she's thinking about what is the opposite. So the opposite doesn't come down here. The opposite actually goes in the diagonal box. So these two which are opposites for each other, are where you're going to find that it's either this or this, right? So you're going to find that the opposite lives in the kitty corner across. So here, Alyssa said that she would feel guilty about being too harsh, that it may involve physical punishment, that the children would resent her, that the father has reasons to accuse her of being abusive or incompetent, and that the children get so used to being hit that it loses its ability to affect their behavior, right? So these are all of the downsides of prioritizing tough love. Okay, I'd like you to take the time to fill out this box on your map. And remember, this is the downside of this pole. And if you're having trouble thinking about what goes in here, look at what you've already got in this box on the top left-hand corner, and then look for the opposites. And let me know if you have any questions. Now, also, please remember that when you're filling out a map, if you have 5 things here, you want to have 5 things here, because we want to create a balanced map. So if you have 10 things here, that's not a balanced map, right? Or if you have 10 things here and only 2 here, that's not a balanced map. So you need to push yourself to make sure that you are giving equal weight to each of the polarities, both the upsides and downsides. Okay, are we ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. All right, Alyssa, there is a reason why you are feeling, certainly you can have some more minutes, Louisa. Let me give you another minute or so to make sure you get that, because it's important you get your map full. All right. Okay, we're going to move on. Alyssa, there's a reason why you're starting to realize that gentle love isn't always the answer, right? What might be some of the downsides of just focusing on gentle love without considering tough love as an option? What might be some of the downsides of doing that?
I think for me with the girls is that I tend to tell them and argue about the same thing over and over without any compliance. So they hear me for the moment, but it's not something that they remember. It's like things that they would do again.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
then, yeah.
Go ahead.
And then if I have to be a little bit tough on them, even though it's verbal and not physical, I find myself consoling them after disciplining them, like especially if they start crying, or I feel bad about it immediately. So that's a downside.
Okay. All right. So there is a downside to too much gentle love, right? So it was like when we did the inhalation and exhalation exercise, after a while, something that was working for us stops working for us, and you experience the downside. So now, those of you who are following along, I'd like you to consider what is the downside of the pole you tend to prefer, right? So whatever you have in the box here, what is the downside of that? And again, push yourself to match the number that you have in the first box. So if you have 5 things, push for at least 5 5 downsides. Any questions, any challenges anyone's facing? I think you can probably predict where we're going to go next. So once again, now we have one last quadrant to fill. And this is probably the quadrant you have ignored the most, Alyssa, because it's probably one you've never thought about, never experienced. And it's also the reason why we leave it to the end, because it's the last one you work into. And this is what could possibly be the upside of this pole. So of tough love, what could possibly be some reasons why you might want to try some tough love, right?
Before this polarity map, my answer was there's no upside to tough love.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. When we had our coaching call, right? It was, there's no good reason for tough love. But the thing is that if you're struggling to find what is the upside, it's probably the opposite of the downside of gentle love. So whatever you have in the downside over here, if you look for the opposites, you will find that they belong up here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
it will lead to
your answers.
My answers were because I thought that because I had to repeat myself and there wasn't compliance, the tough love would get compliance, so it would lead to compliance. I get to stick to my guns without feeling bad about it. It works on both children because I'm not feeling sorry for one more than the other. And the fourth one would be I'm less partial on the treatment. Both of them get the same kind of treatment. And then it leads to less frustration because I'm not repeating the same thing over and over again.
Okay. So those are your upsides. Those of you who are making your map, think about what is the possible upside of that pole you tend to ignore, right? So when I built my own map, which was care for self and care for others, where care for self was the pole I ignored, I had things like, well, if I took care of myself, I would have time for physical exercise. I would be healthier. I wouldn't be experiencing burnout, right? I would have time for creative endeavors. I would have time to think. I wouldn't always be rushed. So there were a number of upsides that suddenly became obvious to me as I was building this map. So please take a few moments to finish your last quadrant. Take another minute. All right. Do you have a balanced map? Do you have roughly the same number of items in each quadrant? Okay, I see Zorana saying yes, Sumaira is saying yes. Okay, so good. Thank you, Omnia. Right.
Narina,
Sure. Narina, I see your question. So the second quadrant, which was which was here, the bottom right-hand quadrant, is the downside of the pole you avoid. Okay. Very few in the top right. Hey, Nicole, when you're looking for things to put in the top right, consider what is the opposite of the bottom here, the bottom of this. Yeah, I know. And don't worry, when you have your little coaching call in a few minutes with your peer, perhaps they might be able to help you figure that out. Okay, few in there too. Okay, well, they can certainly, hopefully your peer-to-peer coach will be able to help you think about some of the challenges that perhaps you haven't encountered here yet. Okay, all right, before we move into that, remember when we talked about inhalation and exhalation, and I said to you that there was an infinity loop that represents the energy and experience of all polarities? Well, yeah, let's draw our infinity loop now, okay? So Alyssa, the question I have for you is, how often do you experience the upside of gentle love? How often do you think you experience the upside of gentle love?
more often.
More often? Okay. So all the time, some of the time, or all the time, most of the time, to none of the time, you would say most of the time or all of the time?
Most of the time.
Most of the time. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to presume that right here in the middle is 0. And the further away I get from the middle represents how frequently I experience something. So Alyssa said most of the time, so I'm going to put a little X over here. That's going to represent, I'm actually going to move to a bigger marker because it's easier to see. That represents most of the time. If she had said all of the time, I would have gone all the way up here. If she had said none of the time, I would have gone really close to the middle line here. Okay, so if you have the ability to mark for yourself how frequently you experience the upside of this pole, then please go ahead and do that on your map, right? So just imagine that there's a vertical line that runs all the way down here, and this is the scale that you're using. All right, I'm going to undo that. Okay. How often do you experience the downside of gentle love?
Often as well.
Often as well. Okay. So I'm going to give you, once again, this is 0. And the further away I get from that middle line represents how often. So if she had said all of the time, I would have gone down here. If she had said none of the time, I would have gone up here. Okay. But she said most of the time. So I'm going here. Now, on this side, how often do you experience the upside of tough love?
Not often, because it's not something I do.
Okay, so then because it's not often, I'm going very close to the middle line, right? Am I not sharing my screen?
You are?
You
Okay.
are. Just as an FYI, Zoom have changed their format now. So if you go to the top of your Zoom screen now, there are tabs. One says meeting and the other says Ismet is sharing her screen. If you click to the II screen, Ismet II screen, you'll be able to see what Izzy is sharing.
Thank you,
Okay.
Emma.
Thank you, Emma. And then down here, how often do you experience the downside of tough love?
Not often, because I'm not.
You're not going into this pole.
I'm not usually using it, yeah.
So somewhere like this. So
Yeah.
right now, what your loop, what your energy flow looks like is something, hang on, I am drawing with my finger on a trackpad, so please pardon the not so great ellipses that I'm making here. This is what your infinity loop looks like, right? So you experience the upside of, and this is the energy flow. It always flows in this direction. So you experience the upside of gentle love. You then have the experience of the downside of gentle love. And then because you hardly ever spend any time in tough love, you experience none of the upside of tough love. The advantage is, of course, that you also don't experience any of the downside of tough love, but then before long, you're back into gentle love. Now, the thing with polarities is that when they are this far out of balance, what will eventually happen is over time, you will experience less and less of the upside of gentle love, and you will only find yourself spiraling through the downside of gentle love, right? Because it will lose its ability to give you that positive result. And any polarity taken to an extreme, that's what happens. Okay. So once you have plotted your energy loop, it might look like this. It might look like Alyssa's polarity loop. It might look very different. You might experience a loop which looks like, has this as a significant downside. Or perhaps you're no longer experiencing the upside of the other side either, right? You're just experiencing the downside of one of the loops. The ideal polarity loop looks like the one in the background here, which is grayed out, but let me show it to you, is one where you experience all of the upside of this loop, of this pole. You experience very, very little of the downside of this pole. And with, oh my gosh, my drawing is so bad here. And then after a very short period of time, you make the switch to the other pole, so you experience all of the upside of this other pole. And as soon as you start to experience the downside of this pole, you are triggered to make a move to the opposite choice. Okay. So very simply put, if we were building the map for activity and rest, you would be active, you would benefit from all of the upside of activity. And the minute your body started sending you signals, or your mind started sending you signals that you're getting tired, you need to rest, you would make the sensible decision to rest, right? And then once your body started sending you signals that actually now you're stagnating, you're starting to lose energy because you've rested too long, you would make the sensible decision to get active again. And a well-managed polarity will give you the upsides of both poles and minimize the downside of each pole. Okay. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to draw their loops and fill out their inner quadrants, because here is what we're going to do now. We're going to invite you to go into a breakout room. Excuse me while I stop sharing this screen and share a different one. Okay, so we're going to invite you into a pair and share opportunity. And when you're in that room, we're going to ask you to introduce yourselves and then share the polarities that you've been working on. So share which were the polarity pair that you selected.
Okay.
And then discuss how that tension shows up in your lives. So what does it look like? What does the upside of it look like? What does the downside of it look like? And if you haven't got a matching set of ups and downs, then ask your partner to help you find that, right? Ask your partner to help you complete your map. So if you only have 2 or 3 instead of the 5 that you have in the other quadrants, then perhaps they can make some suggestions to you that, do you experience this? Do you possibly experience that? Because these are all polarities we're all familiar with. We've all had experience with them in some way, shape, or form, right? Any questions about what we're asking you to do in the breakout rooms before we open the breakout rooms? No? Okay. What we will do is we'll share these instructions for you in the chat, but also we will ask you we will give you a heads up when you're about midway point, right? Because that'll give you an indication that it's time to switch the conversation to the other partner so that you make sure that you have enough time for both people, right? Does that make sense? I believe we have 20 minutes for partner sharing, according to my agenda. Does that work for you, Emma and Alyssa? Does that look right?
Okay. Yep, works for me.
Perfect. All right, so 20 minutes. So you have at least 10 minutes per person to talk about your polarity maps, what you're working on, what you experience, and get some help filling out those inner quadrants. Right? If there are no questions before we go, enjoy your conversations. Now we'll work on the outer quadrants of the map. And what that means is we're going to say to ourselves, okay, when I experience the negative or the downside of the polarity that I tend to prefer, what are the warning signs that I have spent too long in this pole, right? That I have spent too much time or energy caring for others, or that I have overemphasized gentle love, or that I have really put too much focus on being strong and not enough focus on being vulnerable. What are the early warning signs? The key word here is early, because you don't want to wait till you hit the very bottom of this polarity in order to make that shift. Remember, we said that a well-balanced polarity is one where you just start to experience the downside and it's enough of a cue for you to make the switch. So you don't, if this was activity and rest, that you wouldn't keep emphasizing activity till you were completely burnt out, right? That you would listen to your body and your mind and recognize the early signs that you're starting to overdo something so that you can make a move to the opposite pole. So we're going to be working on what are the early warning signs. And once we've done that, we say to ourselves, well, what are the action steps that we would take in order to move ourselves to the other pole? So here's a little warning bell that goes off. Once we hear that warning bell, what will we do in order to make the switch from one pole to the other? And then similarly, we'll be asking ourselves, what are the warning signs that we have stayed too long in this pole? And then once that warning bell starts to ring, how will we make the move over to the other pole? Right? So this is what we're going to be working on. And once again, we're going to go back to Alyssa's map and look at how she might use the outer quadrants of this map in order to help herself manage these polarities, right? And I'd like you to follow along while building on your maps. Any questions before we move into this? Can you see the mural? Can you see Alyssa's map? Okay, great. All right, so the question that I asked Alyssa was, Alyssa, what are some early warning signs that you have overdone gentle love?
The first one was repeating a request more than once, because I find myself saying the same thing over and over again, giving the same instructions, and then them not listening. So repeating the request more than once is the first one.
Yeah.
The second one is because I'm more gentle on one child than the other, that it's only working on one child. And then the last one was finding myself completing a request on my own. So if I'm like, clean your room, or don't take food into your room, I find myself, after saying it multiple times, having to do it on my own to clean the room.
Okay, so those are the early warning signs for you that gentle love is not working, right? And I know I'm putting you on the spot here because it's hard to answer these questions when you don't have, haven't had a chance to think about it beforehand. But what would be a late warning sign? I can share my example if that's
Okay.
helpful. For me, a late warning sign is that I don't even bother to ask anymore, right? I don't even bother to ask the kids to do something. I just go do it myself because I don't want to go through the whole cycle of asking, getting frustrated, getting upset, and then doing the thing myself. I just jump ahead and do it myself. But that's a late warning sign.
Okay.
Right? So what I'd like all of you to do is think about what are some early warning signs that you're starting to experience what's in this quadrant over here. And write those down in your quadrant. All right. Any challenges or any questions around this ask? Remember, you want early warning signs. So don't wait till the situation is already beyond control or you've already crossed the threshold where you know now you're in a downhill spiral. For me, in terms of care for self and care for others, when I start to eat into my workout time, or I have a daily practice of drawing or sketching, and I find that I am now not even able to set aside 15 minutes to do that, right? That's a warning sign that I'm overdoing care for others. When I stop planning to have 15 minutes in my day to sketch, that's a late warning sign for me. All right. So, Alyssa, what might be some action steps that you could take in order to make the move from gentle love to tougher love?
Apart from telling them what I would like them to do and repeating the same thing, I can start talking to them about maybe the consequences of their actions or inaction or not doing it. Like what will happen if they listen, what will happen if they do not listen. So talking about the consequences, that would be the first.
Yeah.
The second would be to make it a little bit fun if they listen. So the consequences would be like sort of gamifying the task to give them a privilege at the end of it. So privileges earned and not necessarily material privileges, but day-to-day privileges that they take for granted, like watching TV or being able to watch a clip on YouTube for 15 minutes, so that's a big privilege and it's just taken for granted.
That's great.
And then, and the last one would be like to reassure them that love is unconditional, so that I love them regardless of whether or not they are punished or they get a consequence because of their inaction. So, and it's not equivalent to like. So I love them all of the time, but I may not like them when they do not listen. I got that one from you, so thank you.
Yes, the love and like, yes. So those are the action steps that Alyssa might take in order to start to leverage some of the upside of this pole, of the opposite pole. Okay. So now on your maps, I'd like you to think about what might be some action steps that you could take, which would allow you to make the switch from the pole that you tend to prefer to leveraging the upside of the pole that you tend to avoid. Okay. So again, in my example, and care for others and care for self, I might start to say that the 15 minutes that I take to do my daily sketching exercise, right, is a non-negotiable. And I might even block it in my calendar as if I have a Zoom meeting, so I can go into my office, shut the door, and pretend that I'm working, but I'm actually taking time for myself. Or I might go for a walk during a meeting so that I can listen into a meeting and get a little bit of physical exercise at the same time. So what are some ways in which you might access some of the upside? Any questions? Are you able to follow along and do this in your quadrants? Okay. Great. I see some yeses. All right. Super. Remember, if you're struggling to fill some of those action steps or some of those early warning signs, when you're in your coaching call with your colleague on in the breakout room in a little bit, you will be able to ask for some help with that as well. All right, now let's go the other way. What are some early warning signs that you might be overdoing tough love? Listen. What would you put in?
I won't overdo it. So.
That's tough. Yes. But I mean, here you said that, you know, you might feel guilty about being too harsh. It may involve physical punishment, or the children might resent you or complain about you to their father. The children get so used to being hit that it loses all its ability. So obviously, we don't want you to hit that last one, but perhaps there's something around feeling guilty about being too harsh. Or maybe there's something that you're considering physical punishment because you're so frustrated. So maybe that's a sign.
And then the one that I was concerned about is that they become indifferent. And then that's a con. When they become indifferent to what you're saying or what you do, then that is.
Yeah, that is. But is that early enough? Is the question that I think I asked you even then. Because that degree of indifference comes when you have experienced a lot of the downside of tough love already. So maybe it's where your children are no longer responsive because they are, they figure that it'll be over in a minute. You know, I might get smacked and then it'll all be over. But supposing the tough love consequences weren't about physical repercussions, but about losing privileges. That's also tough, right? But it doesn't have to involve the physical. Anyway, that's my, so if you start to guilt trip yourself, you find yourself wanting to smack them.
Yeah.
I see we've had this conversation. Oh, the children seem indifferent. You know, those might be some early warning signs for you that, bye, Alejandra. You can catch up with the video later on. And then once you have those triggered, then what are some ways in which you might access the upside of gentle love?
Talk to them about the consequences of their action.
And anything else?
Gamify. You remember we spoke about gamifying the privileges earned and reassuring them about their.
You may have noticed something here that Alyssa is using the same action steps or suggesting the same action steps on both sides of the map. That's fantastic. That's not cheating, and it's not a bad idea. It's actually a great idea to have an action step that we call a high leverage action step, because it allows you to access either pole, and you can use the same action, but it gives you access to the opposite pole, and it works for both poles, right? So that's actually a really great action step. So if you want to gamify, then having gamification on both sides actually is a great idea. Okay. And it might allow you to manage that polarity almost without thinking about it. Because gamification allows the children to be a part of managing that polarity, and it's not just you as behind the driver's, in the driver's seat. So if you can find a high leverage action step that works for both sides, that's fantastic. And you might also find that some of the early warning signs might be the same on both sides. So for example, in care for self and care for others, if I am finding that, let me think of a warning sign that would be the same on both sides, but that my calendar is either, my calendar becomes the warning sign. It's either too full or too empty. Right? If it's too empty, I've really not set aside time for deliberate commitment to other people. If it's too full, then I've not set aside time for myself. So a calendar that is out of sync or out of balance is an early warning sign for me on both sides. But it might say different things. Okay. Okay. So how is your map looking? Were you able to get something in each of the quadrants as a warning sign and as action steps? Do you have something there that perhaps has become visible to you now, or has become evident to you now that you hadn't thought of before as you were experiencing these stresses? Please feel free to unmute and share. Anyone? Okay, no problem. Let's stop sharing this. No, I'm going to move into here. Has everybody had a chance to fill all 4 of the outer quadrants of their maps? All right. Would you like some help with filling out and padding up those outer quadrants? Okay, great. Super. So let's take advantage of the wonderful people in this room, and let's go into a new breakout. Hopefully you will find yourself with people you were with before, but because we've had some people dropping off and some new people joining, there might be some changes, which gives you an opportunity to tap into new conversations. So when you are in your breakout rooms, if you would, identify the way you feel when things are out of balance. So start to become sensitive to the fact that you are experiencing polarities and that you're experiencing the tensional polarities, and what does that feel like? Identify the early warning signs. So share the early warning signs that you have noticed with your coaching partner. And if you, as a coaching partner, push back and make sure that the person is referencing something that is an early indicator rather than a late indicator that they're in trouble. Okay. So, you know, when I said that in Alyssa's case, when she stops even asking the children for help, that's a late indicator. But an early indicator is that she has to ask them several times. So make sure that there's a distinction between that, and help the other person find some of those action steps that they might need to make the switch from one pole to the other. Right? Okay. And I know you're all wonderful coaches because everyone came back looking quite happy from their previous conversations. So we're going to invite you to take advantage of a breakout room, and you can come back. We can definitely do another 20-minute breakout, which is great. Right, we'll give you a heads up at 10 minutes so that if you are in a pair, you can make the switch, but please enjoy your conversations. How was the mapping exercise? Actually, I'd love to hear whether it was helpful. Did you have any insights? Did you have, did it help you navigate or figure out how you might navigate a polarity that you've been encountering? Yes. Okay. What became evident to you that wasn't evident before? Please unmute. We're a very small group. It would be really great to hear from a few of you if you would be willing to share. Great. We have the same polarity. Ooh, Nicole, that was a lucky pairing. That's great.
I will just say my partner can remain anonymous, but I think in some sense I don't have much to complain about because other people have much more to do than me. That's what I realized. I'm struggling and other people are still doing much, much more. So
yeah. But that doesn't mean that you're not experiencing the tension and stress of a polarity regardless, right? So it's helpful all the same to be able to use this tool and this methodology to be able to navigate better. I see Belfiore. Did I say that correctly? Yes. Would you be willing to tell us a little bit more?
Yes. Fortunately, me and Zorana, I said her name. I was not supposed to mention her. Sorry.
Go. I wrote your name in the
He wrote it in the chat, so you're okay.
Oh, okay.
Cat is out of the bag.
Okay. Okay. Well, luckily we had chosen the same polarity. So our polarity was about stability and risk. And luckily again, we come from very similar countries. We both live in Balkans. We're close countries and we share the same culture, I might say. And it was very easy for us to exchange information. So Zorana helped me a lot into understanding into elaborating more the early warnings of focusing a lot in the stability. For example, I had written down boredom, meaning this light boredom, not depression, of doing the same stable routine that you do every day. And sometimes you don't feel fulfilled enough. So Zorana asked me to elaborate it more, and I think a kind of elaboration that I did was this explanation of not feeling really fulfilled by the routine and by this stable life. Also, we talked a lot and we shared experiences about overthinking about the issues in the same work environment. So when you do only this stable life, meaning you get into the same routine every day, sometimes you keep overthinking about these situations or people or problems that come from this routine. And one of the actions that we talked about it with my partner is being aware about the mental hygiene that we should try to achieve, because you cannot control your mind, but mental hygiene, meaning not to think about work and work issues after the working hours. So maybe this is not really achievable, but being aware of it, it's also very important. Well, these are some of the issues. It's interesting that both of us in the risk action steps, we had written a good mentor, both of us. Yes, having a good mentor so that you don't collapse into chaos.
Yeah.
And the mentor won't enslave you. And also a mentor who can also be a life coach, who can try to give you some key examples and try to understand how you can balance work and life too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Actually makes me think about the session we're offering tomorrow, the next workshop. It's about building the network you need. And that's a great addition to the network that you need, right? Being able to
Yes,
in
absolutely.
somebody like that and find someone like that. I'd
Yes.
also like to point out that what you've shown here through this conversation and sharing the benefits of this conversation with us is the benefit of peer-to-peer coaching. We always think that coaching has to happen across a hierarchical difference, that somebody has to be a mentor and you are the recipient of their sage advice. But actually, your peers can also have sage advice because they are sharing the context. In this case, you even shared a cultural context, which is beautiful. But sometimes just your peers can offer great insight because they're going through the same lived experience as you. And Jennifer, I love that you had someone who had the opposite polarities to yours, had the opposite preferences. So what was that conversation like, if you don't mind sharing?
It was really interesting because we had a lot of similar keywords in the same spot, but just with a different preference. And but when it came to the action steps and the early warnings, I thought that was also interesting because they were definitely different. Or it may be similar action, but early warning signs presented themselves differently. But it was just interesting to see, well, the similarities, but also to gain some insight through the differences. Like also, for example, negative sides of one or the other. So we had cognition and emotion. To hear someone else's perspective of the negative sides, like, yeah, that's true as well. So
that's fantastic. It's so helpful when you have that too. It's the mirror, right? That we don't often look into, that we start to appreciate the other side. I'm waiting for someone who can mirror to me what my husband's take is on household cleanliness. So, you know, once I find that, maybe I'll be able to. We were having our own conversation around polarities while you were in the breakout rooms. We had our own little peer-to-peer coaching, and that was a big missing ingredient for us. All right. Anyone else want to share what their experience was or how this exercise worked for them before we go to the next piece? Yes, Valerie, please go ahead. Go ahead. Valerie,
Okay. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi. I was putting my video up for internet issues, so I'll just go back. So I was so happy to share with my partner, who is from Nigeria. So we had very common similarities. You know, we had similarities in our polarities. What we could really recognize what each other were saying. I selected tough love, gentle love, and hers was self-care, caring for others. And one thing I can say is that I could have selected caring for self and caring for others as well, and she could have selected the other one. So the different issues that we brought up or that we discussed was so lively. It was a rich conversation, and we looked at these action steps, and we tried to see that sometimes one of the action steps we took was we talked about was planning strategically, you know, having a strategic plan. And then we ask ourselves, really, sometimes we know a lot of these things, but we don't actually carry them out. So how do we do that? You know, if you plan, then you'll be able to perform better in one way or another, but then something can come up. For example, she has this wonderful plan on how to make sure that she takes care of herself, and she puts everything in place to be able to take care of herself. Then another something happens and she can't follow on that initial plan, you know. So how do we really navigate these kind of challenges that we face every day, you know, or really drawing the line? What is very important to have balance between self-care and caring for others, have balance between gentle love and tough love. But we're in the middle. So we realized that at one point, more care for yourself, another point, more care for others. And at one point, you have to really put the tough love, and the gentle love is also important. So if you do a mix, then I think you will get a better result out of it. And for the gentle and tough love, it's always with children as well. So thank you. It was really nice.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, Valerie. And Annabelle, you had something to share?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Also, with my partner, we had a similar polarity of work life and home life. So I realized that in academia, mostly we are working, we are reading, we are hunting for scholarships and grants. But at the same time, we are women, we need kids, we need to take care of the family. So there was need that we strike a balance between the two, not to neglect work, but as well as the family needs to be there. And then we're fortunate enough to really share emails, our emails, so that we can keep in touch. And she was able as well to share some of the scholarships that I can apply to as an early career research. And you find that some of the opportunities can actually allow you to carry along the family, so you can go for such things. I really had a great time. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. So what's really interesting as a result of all of these conversations and your sharing back is you've highlighted something that is very appropriate. One is context is everything, right? Polarities are really situational, how you experience them, how you navigate them. It's always in response to the context that you find yourself in. One of the things that people sometimes think is required to manage polarities is that you have to spend an equal amount of energy and an equal amount of time in both poles. That's not true. If all I need is 15 minutes of sketching time in a day to care for myself, then that's more than enough, as long as it allows me to re-enter the caring for others without feeling burnt out and resentful or tired or emotionally depleted. Then that 15 minutes is all I need, right? So it's not about spending 12 hours of the day in something and 12 hours of the day in another. It's really about making sure that you are meeting the needs that you have through that polarity, and then being able to move into the other one. So situation changes, polarities, how you navigate them, context changes, culture is a huge piece of how we experience and navigate polarities. And then something that you pointed out, Valerie, in your observation about care for self and care for others and tough love and gentle love, that there are many commonalities. It's because at the heart of most polarities are something that we call core polarities, right? And core polarities are polarities like freedom and control. So tough love and gentle love is actually another version of freedom and control. Care for self and care for others is another version of another polarity, core polarity, which is self and others. Then another core polarity that you may experience in many different versions is part and whole. So that is a polarity which often shows up as, prioritizing the individual or prioritizing the team, right? That's a part and whole polarity. So you're going to find that there are many connections between polarities, and many polarities overlap with other polarities, and we call them nested polarities, right? Or sister polarities. So you're absolutely right to make the observation that there were a lot of similarities amongst them. Okay. I just want to make sure that we land this discussion with what is needed. Someone put something in chat that I just missed. Okay. All right. No, we're good. All right. So this is one of my favorite quotes about polarities. Can everyone see my screen? Can everyone see the slides? Okay, great. That genuine tragedies in the world are not the conflicts between right and wrong. They're the conflicts between two rights, right? So polarities, you will always find that when you're talking about polarities, or when you do talk about polarities, always try and make sure that the terminology that you use to talk about polarities is neutral for both sides. So you don't want to call it love and punishment, right? It's tough love and gentle love. They're both versions of love. One is just a gentle version of love, and the other is tough love. They're more neutral terminology than love and punishment, right? We wouldn't call it that because that's not what it is. But people might, especially if you're polarized around something, you might find it difficult to find the neutral terminology for the other side. So go find somebody else and ask them what is the value that they are protecting. Okay. And you will probably find the more neutral term for that polarity by having that conversation. So how do we tell, how is a polarity different from a problem? Well, for one thing, problems can be solved and polarities cannot be solved. They can only be managed. If I asked you which direction are the birds flying in, what would your answer be? You can indicate. They're all flying that way? Okay. All right. Okay. But if I asked you what color are the birds? The answer is which bird? Yes, Priscilla. So the thing is that polarities, there's always two right answers. You could have either black birds here or white birds here, right? So what's the color of the bird? If I asked you that question, you would say brown and white. Thank you. Yes, brown and white, not black and white. But if I ask you which direction are they going in, there's only one right answer, right? But if I ask you what color are they, there are two right answers. So when we're talking about polarities, there's always more than one right answer, but the two right answers cannot coexist. And so it's always with a problem, there's always one right answer and you can find a solution to it that everyone would agree is the right answer. But with polarities, you will never be able to find a solution that everyone agrees is the one right answer. Right? So that's a big difference between polarities and problems. And a problem, you can solve it once and then it's over. But a polarity is something that you will navigate every single day. It will always be a part of your life. You will always be thinking about prioritizing care for self or care for others. You will always be thinking about focus on stability or risk. You will always find yourself facing the challenges of care for self and care for others, activity and rest. These are not problems that you can solve once and that they will go away, because the minute the context changes, the problem shifts, the polarities shift, and you have to once again find the right answer for that situation. So there's only ever a right answer for the moment in a polarity, right? When you're working towards, it requires you to defer judgment, because here's the thing with polarities, you really have to be able to say there is more than one right answer. And perhaps that's the challenge that I face with my husband around the house cleaning. I think there's only one right answer. And I think orderliness is the answer. But in his opinion, right, the flexibility and control polarity, flexibility is the right answer, whereas for me, control is the right answer. And when I can set aside my presumption that control is the only right answer, then perhaps I can start to appreciate the upside of flexibility being the right answer. Yes, you can have multiple right answers depending on the situation. And which right answer is the right answer for the moment depends on the context, Samira. All right. So what do you do next with all this stuff that we've talked about today? Well, polarities are everywhere. Hopefully, you're now going to start to see them everywhere. When I first got trained in polarity thinking, I made a real nuisance of myself because I kept pointing out polarities in everything. People knew me as the queen of polarities because that was all I would ever talk about. And you can be equally annoying now because you are going to see polarities everywhere. Every time you find yourself in a conversation that you've had 100 times with somebody and not reached a conclusion, right? You can be sure there's a polarity at play. Use the polarity mapping for yourself, for your personal life. If you scroll down further in the worksheet, you will also see that there's a very short list of professional polarities, polarities you might be experiencing in your professional life, right? It's really a useful exercise to do this with your teams or with your peers or with your people that you coach, right? Build maps with them. The instructions for how to build the maps are included in the worksheet. So if you scroll down, it'll take you step by step through all the stages of the process. And the link that we shared is also an editable PDF. So you just save it as a new version each time, and you can reuse that mapping facility as many times as you like, or just build a map on a piece of paper. It's not very hard to do. You just make 8 boxes and you fill out the map. But one of the key things that you can use polarity mapping for is to manage some of the conflicts and arguments in your life. So what I would suggest is if you hit a deadlock with somebody around something that they are polarized around and you disagree with them about that polarity that they've chosen, start to build a map with them, but build the map with their preferred polarity in the left-hand side so that you're building the map from their perspective, right? So ask them, what is the value that's keeping you here, right? Why do you really appreciate, in my example, and now I'm going to have to go do this because I've just come to this realization that I should. If I was to build a map of flexibility and control with my husband, I would have to start with what is the upside of flexibility, right? What is it that you really appreciate about flexibility that's keeping you polarized around that? And what is it that you fear about control? So you fill it from their perspective and you say, okay, what do you like and what do you fear? What do you value and what do you fear? And then you say to them, okay, but do you see any downside? Is there a potential downside to too much flexibility? And then you take them into the downside of flexibility. And finally, you say, okay, when you experience that, is there a reason why you might appreciate a little bit of control in our chaotic lives, right? And so then you finally bring them up. So when you're trying to resolve a conflict with somebody, always build a map from their perspective with them. And you're going to find that they're going to be far more willing to enter a conversation about it because you are starting with their perspective first, what they value and what they fear first. Okay. All right. I really hope that you are going to be willing to use this as you go forward. I wanted to mention that we have another workshop tomorrow for some of you. It might be a day later for others, depending on time zones. But we have a strategic skills workshop. We will be talking about, oh gosh, I completely forgot. I need to check whether what we shared today was useful at all. Would you be willing to take one last Zoom poll with me, please? And I'll let Emma bring it up. So the question is, we asked you earlier, how equipped do you feel to manage the competing priorities in your lives? Now the question is, how well equipped do you feel now? Okay, so we have 80. 8% participation. That's great. Okay, good. Super. All right, so I want to mention that the next workshop that we're going to be doing, we're going to also be using some worksheets. It's going to be a really fast run through them because there was so much that we wanted to share, and but hopefully you'll find it useful. We'll be doing something around decision making. We will also be doing something around building the network you need. So when we talked about the benefits of peer-to-peer coaching, that might be something you want to keep in mind as we do the work around that, and something about being deliberate about your growth and learning. So those are the strategic skills that we'll be sharing in the next workshop. We do hope you'll join us. And if not, don't worry, you'll have access to the recordings and the worksheets. So all of the resources that we've used today will also be available to you, as well as the ones from the next workshop. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. We really appreciate it. Thank you for participating so generously. And for coaching.
And if you did have a chance to give us feedback on today's session, it only takes 5 minutes. I've just sent the link in the Zoom chat. And of course, it will help us make any tweaks to tomorrow's session if you have any direct feedback now, but it only makes us better for future events. So please do give us feedback.
All right.
Thanks, team.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you very much, Izzy.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.